We're excited for this class. You do not know Baroness Morrghan. You've probably seen her work if you've been anywhere around Ontario and met any royal whatsoever. This is going to be a great class. We are looking forward. With that, we'll turn it over. And can you introduce yourself, Baroness Morrghan?
All right. So, hi, I am Baroness Morrghan. I live here in Adiantum in the Principality of the Summits here in Ontario. I've been a crafty person since I was a teenager and found the SCA and the two kind of hand in hand led me down a merry road of collecting hobbies. And so I picked up block printing a few years ago, and it meshed it hand in hand with one of my other favorite hobbies, which is thrifting. And so I found various sources for my materials, and I spent a lot of time finding different resources that most people wouldn't think about it for, textile painting. And so I've just kind of collected quite a few different things to kind of show you that no matter what you have access to, if you've got a dollar store in town, you've got tools. If you've got a hardware store, you can find tools. And so it's just kind of a little bit of everything today. I kind of want to show you the various blocks I create and what the different materials are. I'd like to show you the different tools that I use and maybe some of the pros and cons along the way. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat so that I can kind of keep up with you as you keep up with me, and we'll just go to town. Okay. All right. So the first thing that I've got here on my table, when I first started out, I picked up basically what you can find at any Joann's store, which is Basewood. And so pretty much all craft stores have a little section where they've got a little bit of carving stuff. Basewood is great for block printing because it's got a very dense, even grain. And that's why I've got this flipped over, so that you can kind of see that this is all a uniform surface on the back. I can see that better on these guys. So this one's been roughed up by being in my drawer for a while, but you can see that I use the end grain to carve into so that when I stamp on my blocks, they're getting all of that downward pressure on them. So this is really easy to find. I think I want to say 3 pieces will usually run you about $6 or $7. So it's a nice entry level, easy to carve wood. This is kind of my next step up, and this I got at the local woodcrafter store, and it was just a chunk of lathe stock. So it was about 12 inches long, and I cut it into 6 2-inch blocks. And this is a nice, fine, dense end grain. So for about $12, I got 6 stamps out of it. And it's so nice to carve. And so there was definitely an upgrade in quality of carving versus the cheap stuff. So I also have bought good quality basswood in a big blind box from Woodcrafter. So it was just a whole bunch of odds and ends. So I paid about $25 for a box that, was about a foot square maybe. And I never noticed a difference between the Woodcrafters basswood and the stuff I got at Joann's. So, if there's a difference, I didn't find a good quality difference between the two, and I still use both and the teak when I can get my hands on teak. It is very nice to carve. So if you don't want to carve in wood, some of the alternatives are, you can get the carving rubber that they use for making stamps with from the art store, or you can carve into a pink eraser. You know, pretty much everybody's got one or two of these floating around in their craft stuff. So if you just want to like get into making a simple stamp and just, you know, getting the hang of it, there's probably enough stuff in your junk drawer to get started. So I don't like carving linoleum and rubber as much as I like carving wood. I find that the difference in the way that you cut the lines, wood for me, just, you know, it's a more tactile friendly experience for my hands. So, but if you've got an X-Acto knife and a rubber eraser, you can make a stamp. So now the next stage up for linoleum, or, you know, kind of a rubber carving surface, would be something like the mounted block that you would get for linoleum carving. And here you can see on the edge, it's, you know, this nice, probably a 1/4 inch thick chunk of rubber here on a compressed paper board. And I want to just kind of warn everybody who might not be as messy as me, or who might be as messy as me, when you do get these paper compressed stamps, you want to make sure and seal them before you start going to town. And that's why this block here, you can see that kind of messy surface. The water got in between the layers and expanded, and I ended up having to flake off some damage and then coat the whole thing, which if you seal it before you stamp, and I'm not saying seal the top edge, I'm just saying seal the paper part. But yeah, these guys, they take a whole heck of a lot of abuse, and you need to wash them pretty often. So a waterproof sealant there is my wholehearted recommendation. So, but let's see. Oh, sorry, dog, I didn't know you were there. So as far as the tools that you would use to carve these with, okay, sorry, I'm seeing here in the chat, let's go to that. Yes, Etienne and Fiorleaf both are saying that sealing is your friend. So shellac, which I have not used, Etienne recommends, and Fiorleaf recommends 2 layers of acrylic craft paint on her mounted blocks. So I did do that once without mounting, or without, I used the linoleum without a mount behind it. That was a mess, and I don't recommend that. If you're doing standard paper block printing and using roller press, that might be a completely different animal. But for my abuse and the way that I textile print, I very nearly ruined the stamp before I could actually finish the project I had made it for. Oh, sorry, I was gonna also say, I always save offcuts. This came off of, actually probably came off a corner of this guy. There. So I always save my offcuts because you can do anything with them. So this was going to be a book plate, and then I lost interest and I went off into the scrap pile. But a big chunk like this is only, you know, a little over $11.50, I guess, is what I paid for this. And so, you know, you can take a circle out of that, and then a couple more blocks here and there. So every little bit for me, I find a use for. And so even with my wood carved blocks, you know, I take a chisel. I've got a lovely 2-inch chisel, and I just go whonk and knock the edges off. And then I'll just sit and use those little scraps as interstitial blocks. And so you can just make a tiny little block, or, you know, I think when you guys did the beekeeping class, I don't know if that was one of your guys's, but I, you know, carved a bee while I'm sitting there. Also, if you want to know if the pattern that you're going to do is going to work for your fabric, you can make a small stamp. So I kind of wanted to test this detail on the fabric that I was going to use, but I didn't want to carve an entire block. So I just carved the head and made a little test stamp out of the, actually it's a, for those local to the summits, these guys do have names, and it's Vesta and Lawrence, because they're siblings of Shenanigans. So the two little lions sticking out their heads, if you ever see that, that's the story there. And I knocked something over. All right, moving on to tools. So there are various qualities of tools that you can purchase, and finding them at thrift stores is where I usually, cut the corners all of the time. But recently, the dollar store has come to realize that, they've got a bunch of people who like to try stuff out. And so they have been catering to the craft segment. I have not tested these yet, but 4 knives for $1, it's worth going and fixing up the blades. I don't know if you can see that with them still. Package can come open. So these came from an art store, linoleum knife kit, and these are their dollar store equivalent. So, there's better quality ferrule, probably better quality handle. But if you are looking to get started and not wanting to invest in a whole bunch of, can be quite expensive tools, I think this knife, which is my favorite, block cutting knife, this one I think was $30 to $40 just for this one. So, starting out with this little cheapo set can tell you whether or not, this is something I want to do again, and I'm going to invest in higher quality, or I am done with this and I don't want to touch it again. And I'm only out $1 for a set versus, 10 to 20 to 40 to 50. I think I have a whole set of about 8 of these, and I believe this was about a $50 set, nicer to hold, but these are more built for wood carving. So for the block printing, I usually end up doing really fine lines. So I need really fine tools. So you want to also make sure that, if you see this set at Harbor Freight, that chisel's not so bad, but, the smallest round is about, I would say that's about 1/4 of an inch at least. And there was a lot of work that I had to do to get this tip to actually cut anything. So, this cheap set of tools actually ended up being more expensive than they were worth, because I almost never use them, even though, I bought them and they're not terrible. You can see this one got a lot more use because I've used it to the point where I pop the ferrule off. When I'm working with linoleum or with the rubber, I tend to like the V gouges. And this is my go-to for lino. And it has a pretty decent, little cut. Whereas if I'm doing wood, that's a whole different animal. Anyway, we got some comments here. I'm going to go to the chat real quick. Oh, somebody has asked what the brand name of my favorite knife is, and it is a Flex Cut. And this one, I believe I've seen it at hardware stores, but this one came from Woodcrafter. And then these guys are pretty nice. Ramelson, and I believe we brought those online. And then Speedball is a common brand that you will find. And I picked up this set for 99 cents at a thrift store. Let's see. What other? Oh, let's see. Okay, I think we got all the questions that are related to me off of the chat. Okay, so one of the things you do want to keep in mind, whatever quality of tools you get, you are going to have to sharpen them. This is about, I want to say a $20 sharpening set, but if you've got a piece of leather and the rouge, you can just hone your own. You just want to have the shapes of the inside of your tools. So, you know, for this little half round guy, I would hone the inside a bit by finding the right size. So one of these is a good friend. You'll just want to keep your tools as sharp as possible while you're working with them. This can both be, you know, good and not fun when they cut you, but you know, you'd rather have alternative sources of blocks. You don't have to carve your own. You can, if you live in a big city, you can go to home decor places and you can find, oh, I didn't bring that one over. Hold on. Oftentimes, you can find the actual blocks from textile printing imported by decorators. And so if you go to a big import store, I know up in Portland, I found them in a couple of different places, but you can find textile blocks, you know, as they would be imported from India, I think is where most of these come from. This one has been kind of banged up, and I found it at St. Vinny's for $2.99. So St. Vinny's is a local thrift shop. I don't know if they're all across the country, but I, you know, spend a lot of time looking and finding, and so I tend to, you know, snap it up even if I don't have a use for it, because I know I might have a use for it someday. And that's kind of the double-edged sword of thrift shopping, which is, you know, you pick it up when you see it because it's never going to be there again. And so, you know, that is why we call it a treasure hunt, I guess. So I'm going to move the blocks off the table and make room for some more stuff out here. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them up while I am switching over. Oh, Etienne has mentioned that there are online merchants who sell blocks as well. If you are not a member of the group on Facebook, Painted Fabrics of the Middle Ages, I think I'm getting the name right. There are some fantastic Scadian block makers, and I got to work with some of George's blocks. They were gifted to the summits, and I got to make tabard for the Summits Herald. And so if you get the chance to work with somebody else's blocks, it's so much fun, because you go, oh, that's what you chose to do, and that's how you finish this part of your block. And so like these guys, these are not my work, these are imported from India. These were custom requested, but yeah, I think this was purchased for a specific project. And then I asked the person who commissioned me, like, do you want your blocks back? And they're like, no, I know where to find you when I want to print more. So, you know, finding somebody who wants you to make stuff and is willing to support your hobbies to get nice stuff is always great. Yes. Printed textiles of the Middle Ages. Thank you. Okay, so we have a question. And it says, Katie says she has some hand and neurological issues and uses lino art pieces, but would like to use wood for better textile details. What is my recommendation? Find fine to sacrifice a bit of detail and ease of cutting. Yeah, my hands get really mad at me because I'm a hyper focuser, and so I will end up not paying enough attention to time and realizing that I've been carving for 4 hours and my hand can't move anymore. I think I have found the knife to work better for me as far as getting fine details. Not necessarily that one. This goes faster. So I would say that this big griffin and this double-headed bear probably took about the same amount of time to carve. So if you are looking to get more detail and you only have a limited amount of time to work with your hands, you're probably going to want to lean towards more detail in a shorter amount of time with lino, or probably be smarter than me and take more breaks and cut with wood. So I think that's mainly finding your yeah, that's really a personal decision of finding where you're comfortable with your pain tolerances versus wanting to be annoyingly perfect about things. Because I love this, but if I were to do it over in wood, there's like, of course, 50 things that I could look at and find wrong with my work. Artists were never satisfied. So Fiora Leaf has recommended carving on the safety cut rubber blocks, which is a specific brand name of this kind of stuff. Again, I picked mine up secondhand, so I don't know what brand name that is. But she says she will cut out on the safety cut and then glue that to a rubber wood backing. So you get the benefit of the strength of the wood for the press, because when you stamp down, you do want to apply pressure there. And then you also get the ease of cutting with the safety cut. So, all right. I think we're caught up on questions. So now I just kind of wanted to show you a couple of prints. Most of all of my good quality prints walk out the door before I can, cut a chunk off of them. So my examples come from the cabbage patch, which if you're not familiar with the sewing term, cabbage is the leftover fabric after you cut something out, but it's too good to throw away. And so I use my cabbage as test prints. And so all of my sewing scraps, then they get stamped. One of the things that I have found is your first 2 or 3 stamps of a session, your block needs to like prime itself. I call it the thirsty stamps, because your block is thirsty and it's soaking up your paint. And so I find the first 2 to 3 impressions in your paint or in your stamping, they never print off right. In fact, I've got this chunk right here where you can see the first couple of stamps I did on an on and off cut so that my good fabric wouldn't get muh. So this, you can see the stamp didn't transfer very well, but here, also the type of fabric does make a difference, but here we get a much more clean stamp after the block has had a chance to soak up its first couple of stamps. So, this was just a test print, so it wasn't worth going back over and trying to fill in those lines. Some people really do want to have a perfect image, and so they will go back and they will clean up the bits and pieces. I tend to try and not do that. Just the amount of going back to knowing your body and knowing your pain levels, there's only so much time I get on my feet. So when I want to stamp, I want to stamp, I don't want to sit there and touch up everything to make it perfect. Because I do also think that the imprint of the block and the way that it kind of leaves its mark on the fabric is part of it for me. I do like that kind of, it's not a solid gold line. It's a kind of a mottled color. And so that's, something I like. If that's not something you like, that's, you could work with a different paint. You can work with a different surface. You can, there's a whole bunch of different factors to getting quality of print. I find that, wool wants nice, thick, opaque paint. It doesn't like golds as much. You have to add a yellow to wool. If you want the gold to pop, you have to have kind of an opaque yellow in there. So when I do my test printing for colors, I'll also do that on my scraps, and then they live around forever. So here we've got the Adiantum arms, which is a gold bicranial bear with silver paint. So for this, I designed a block that has a second image that can go inside, and you can get a 2-color print just by kind of thinking about, how do you want to shape this? So let's see. Oh, this is a fun one. I wish I had a bigger chunk of this, but you also can design your block with no negative space. So if you can see where this block lines up with the next one, it creates a single motif. And behind me in the other camera, there's another piece of it behind me in the portrait shot. But yeah, so design wise, you can create end-to-end yardage, or you can create, something that is just a single motif and has, space in between registration marks, etc. This is another fun one. I think I already put that block up. So for this piece, I used a lot of paper and cutouts to try and figure out how to get the circles to match up and how to get all of this to form an unbroken repeat. So, that's a fun little block there. That's, I think, based off of Thomas Beckett's something or other. I love 12th century, and any 12th century extant textiles, I probably have plans to carve a block for them, or have already done so. So anyway, yeah, so do we have any fabric related questions as far as that goes? I also wanted to talk about sourcing fabric. So one of my favorite ways to cut corners with block printed fabric is, again, thrifting it. And so there's many various places. Ooh, cotton velvet for printing. I will get back to that one. I have done that. So one of the things that I like to do as far as sourcing my fabrics is always looking in the curtain section, the tablecloth section, garage sales. My local St. Vinny's has a big fabric department, so I'll just kind of make a beeline to that section, maybe once a week, and go through. And I've kind of stopped doing this in the store because it's kind of maybe a gray area of ethics, but I used to take a lighter in with me to burn a little piece of thread and do a burn test in the store. Now I've gotten to the point where I'm probably about 90% right when I guess. And so I'll just go ahead and, take the loss if it's not a perfect match, and I'll find a home for it. This wool, I got 25 yards of it, or 15 yards of it for $25 at a garage sale. So this has, had a good long life. I think these are some of the smallest pieces I've got left of it. I think I gave away the last 3 yards last year, or last Sport of Kings. But one of the things I like to do is also, do samples where, this was printed and then not washed. And then this one was printed and washed, and this one was heat set and washed, or some of them, I think I've got a second set where where I did that. But if you want to find out, is your paint going to last? Samples. You know, I like sewing samples to some of my kitchen towels. And so I will run a sample through the wash, you know, just keep continuously putting that towel in the wash until it's hit like 4 or 5 cycles, and then see how that survives. You know, if that fabric and that paint combination work, then, you know, it'll survive my children. Woohoo! And if it doesn't, you know, then I can go, well, is that the look I want? No, all the paint is gone. Maybe I want to never wash this garment. And so, you know, especially for wool, wool has such a fluffy texture on the stamping surface that a lot of that paint is going to get kind of held up away from the body of the fabric. Whereas, you know, linen, you're getting that paint and you're just mushing it right through. And so for a wool, you know, it's going to degrade faster than on a linen, but the linen's going to get more wear, so it's probably going to get washed sooner. So that's another thing you got to consider, is each paint is going to break down in different ways. Each fabric is going to contribute to that breakdown. So the finished image is going to depend a lot on, you know, what you want to do with this garment and how you're going to treat it. All right, let's take that mess away. Oh, and silk. Silk loves block printing. Silk absolutely just has a wonderful fine weave, and you know, it soaks up the paint and gets a nice crisp image. So I love block printing on silk. Linen is also my favorite. I have no favorites. I'm a good mom. I love all my children. So, all right. Surface, stamping surface is going to affect your block. So some blocks want to be on a soft surface, some blocks want to be on a firm surface, some blocks, like I actually, Renee Tain does her carved stamps, ceramic cookie stamps. And she had people asking if they could block print with those. And so she handed me a couple to test. And I found that if you put a couple of fluffy layers of polar fleece down and stamp your fabric onto that, you can get a good impression. But if you try to stamp on it with something firm underneath it, nothing, you know, it doesn't want to imprint. And so that one has to kind of mush in. Some fabrics really love, you know, a giving surface, and some need to have that resistance. And so I have a table that is an ironing surface. It's got like 2 layers of wool, 2 layers of warm and natural batting, and then a canvas cover. And that's my primary block printing surface. But as we've established, no flat surface goes without stuff. And so if my table is covered in too much stuff, I've found that a good secondary is this towel that the previous tenants left in the house when we moved in. And so it has served many years as just a manky towel. But I popped down that and a little piece of rubberized, this is the curtain lining, blackout curtain lining. So it's got a rubberized, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the hole in it where I dropped paint on it. But this is a nice waterproof surface. And so I can lay this out on my printing / ironing table, and the ink doesn't go through. So that is important also, is for you guys to, you know, remember that, like, you know, whatever surface you're printing on, you also want to protect. And so I got a bolt of this from a friend who no longer needed it. And, you know, so being a goblin who likes to take care of other people's garbage pays off in the end. Because what was I going to do with that bolt of curtain material? I don't know until I knew, you know, and then it was the perfect thing at the perfect time, and the perfect price was free. actually the cost is having a house full of stuff and having to figure out a way to organize that. And I'm not 100% there. I'm working on it some days, not all days. Back to the right place at the right time. You know, picking up fabric when you find it, whether or not you have a project for it. If you can store it, you can find amazing deals. Like, I think this was 12 yards of silk for $5. How do you pass up a price like that when your husband's heraldry is green and you have children and an addiction to fabric? So, you know, here's just a few samples, because I can't really show you the whole wall of fabric, but I probably have, you know, a ridiculous amount of fabric, you know, probably in the upwards of, you know, how is silk, satin, charmeuse, and cotton? Oh, and back to velvet. Cotton velvet for printing. Did not like getting stamped, but really worked well with stenciling. And so I would lay my stencil down with a little bit of adhesive behind it. And then I would pounce the paint into the stencil design. And as I was doing gold on burgundy and it didn't pop enough with the gold paints that I had, and I tested all my paints and found that throwing a gold pigment on the wet paint, just that was what it really needed to pop. So I would say cotton velvet is going to like stenciling more than printing, and play with, yes, I will be talking about paint, but yeah, play with different types of paint to figure out which one works with the fabric that you're using. And we'll talk a lot more about that when I pull the box of paint out. Silk, satin, charmeuse for printing. I do actually have a tiny piece. I saw it earlier, but it is not a great print. And so I don't always like showing that one off. I think satin charmeuse is probably going to respond better to a treatment like Gouges and silk dyes, just because it is so light. Oh yeah, no, it disappeared in this basket of crud. All right. I found that the lighter weight satin charmeuse, the ink bled, the paint bled really bad, and I didn't play a lot with it, but I would say if you're going to print, you want to print with something super sticky. And, oh, before we move on to paint, but I'll just say this right now. This is a super sticky paint, and I really like this one when I have to get a crisp image and the fabric is being picky, especially when I'm working with lino. Lino does not like wet ink or wet paint. It wants something that'll grab the block and transfer without too much schmutz. So, but I did just want to kind of wrap up on fabric, where it really is just a, it is a matter of time versus money. If you're not going to spend your money, you're going to have to spend your time. And so for me, my fabric collection has probably saved me tens of thousands of dollars for the value that I have, but I probably paid about $500 for the majority of my stash. But I've spent a lot of time hunting down these pieces. So, you know, your time, if your time is more valuable to you than money, then it doesn't make sense necessarily for you to spend like 4 or 5 hours, a week driving around to all the thrift stores in town. But for me, I like fabric. I like to have more of it. I like to save it for people who need it. So finding a piece of $5 silk knoll, actually I can't remember how much I bought this for, but my general rule of thumb is if it's over $10, unless I know there's over 10 yards of it, I'm not buying it. So I tend to find some really amazing deals. I think I've got a bolt right now with Greek key embroidery on silk, and I think that's probably about 20 yards, and I got it for $15. So I spend my time, but I don't have to spend money. Another thing is you want to also make sure you're looking not just in the fabric sections for fabric, because curtains are very convenient, usually with having a tag that tells you exactly what is on it. And so, finding silk curtain panels for, $5 to $7, I got a set of 2 and turned those into a chiton, and it's quite lovely and comfortable. It was fun to try and take the lining out without taking any of the top stitching out, but what are you going to do on a summer afternoon at war? All right. Got a couple of questions. Do I keep a record of how the types of fabric or stamps reactors in a Morrghan mental catalog? It's a mental catalog, and I keep my scraps for testing. Not organized, but I have a bucket where I keep them in, and I pull them out when I kind of want to go through something. I'm very much a if I see it, I remember it kind of person. So it's like that little piece of fabric I can remember, half the time, like what troubles I had with it. So I keep the pieces of fabric that don't print well as the ones that do. And sometimes, just a scrap of fabric will be a great educational experience. So this particular one, I got asked to print for somebody with somebody else's blocks, and the paint that they had used was obscuring all of the details in the block. And so all this lovely carving got really hidden by the the blurriness of the paint once it's stamped. And so I found, going back to, this guy, this paint really worked well. It doesn't come in a navy blue. So then I have all of my testing over here to try and figure out, how do this is what I ended up with, but how do I end up with the right color, and, trying to figure out all of this stuff. And this was ridiculously intense mental workout, because it was also such a limited amount of paint that I literally had to draw out each pattern piece, all the registration for each, intersection, because I wanted to also make sure that the dress was flattering where the stamps went, and making sure I'm not like pointing a griffin's paw in a very inappropriate place for my princess. So, there's a lot of mental gymnastics that go into trying to figure this out. And so with the limited amount of paint that I had, with the, not wanting to waste a single drop, I just, drew everything out, and then, just painted inside the lines basically. And I think I had maybe a quarter of a tablespoon left over by the time I was done. But it was amazing. Such a wonderful project to work for. Eleanor was so good about letting me troubleshoot all of this, because I think she ended up, getting her dress a couple months late, but oh boy, was it so pretty. And she looked amazing in it, and I'm so happy. Anyway, so yeah, so my catalog is literally a scrap bin and a couple of squirrels rotating a crank in my head. Putting it together in a more usable form is on my never-ending list of things that I should really do, but there's a lot of those things. So as far as paint, there's quite a few entry-level ways to get paint to stick to fabric, and basically an acrylic paint and a textile medium are the very, most accessible. You can find them at pretty much any hobby store. You use the textile medium to make the fabric, to make the paint a little bit more flexible on the fabric. Acrylic paint just on its own might end up becoming brittle and cracking. And so that's what this usually does, is to get it to adhere and be softer. But that's not my favorite stuff to use. And again, my favorite thing to use is what the fabric wants. Rust-Oleum, basically house paint, and the metallic accents. This was recommended to me through the Painted Textiles group. And, according to, I believe it's Bridget Bishop, stuff, it wears hard and doesn't need heat setting and looks great on fabric. So I picked up, half a gallon, and I love it. I've had great results with it. Nobody's brought it back to me complaining about, it washed away the first time. So hopefully it works as well for everybody else as it has for me. Again, going back to the wool doesn't like to be washed with that particular paint because of the it not soaking in quite as much. I think if you stenciled, you might have better luck with washability, but wool doesn't like being washed anyway. So, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Again, various house paints can be pressed into service, but really these guys are almost never fail. They are tried and true. They smell god awful. So if you are sensitive to fumes, these are not your friend. But if you can stand the smell, or you've got a good working area where you've got good ventilation, these guys probably will not, go wrong. They do require a little fussiness with how you apply them, but I'll get to that with the tools section. Another happy paint is the Speedball screen printing ink and jacquard textile colors. I tend to really like those three as far as my go-tos. Versatex, I've often used, no problems there. They tend to be a little less as opaque. I think that makes sense. The less dense in pigment, that's what I'm trying to say. Or at least the purple one I used when I printed on white, it came out very translucent. So I don't know that I would really want that if I wanted a bold stamp. I've found that, again, these guys tend to be pretty foolproof, but I almost never come across those while secondhand hunting. For thrift stores, I've had really great luck with Speedball because it can be used for, the people making t-shirts. And so a lot of people will do that as a, fun project, and then they never want to do it again and, get rid of all your stuff. And then I come along and I go, oh yes, $3 for $20 worth of paint. Yes, mine, thank you. So, but you do run into, sorry for the tape sound, but there is a gamble. If you buy a jar of paint and you get it home, it may end up, nope, that one's still liquid. I have bought some that ended up like a solid chunk inside. So, let's see, does Rust-Oleum need a fabric medium? I've never used one with the Rust-Oleum. I haven't had a personal problem with it. But again, I give away most of the stuff that I make. If other people have had issues with it, they haven't gotten back to me. And then there was another question from Etienne. Am I using the Speedball water-based spring painting ink or oil-based? And I use the water-based. Things that complicate cleanup make more of a mess, and I don't need extra steps in between cleaning my tools. And so, yeah. All right. Then to applicating tools, and this is one where you know, there's the traditional, and then there is the ridiculous hack that I came up with because I'm lazy. So traditionally, for applying paint to your blocks, you would put your ink on a glass plate and use a brayer and get a nice even layer of your paint. Then you would take that, and using the brayer, you would apply it to your block, and then you'd stamp. So I found that that takes a really long time between the rolling and the brayer and the application, and I really just want to smash the paint and make it go squish. And so I have discovered these lovely little guys in the paint section at the hardware store, and there's various kinds you can find. Ones with a little spongy on them. You can find this guy at the dollar store. And so this, what I have found is these hold a lot of paint, but they don't necessarily apply a lot of paint because they have this velvet flock. And what that does is that goes in and you apply the paint, but the velvet, the texture also cleans out the crevices while you're applying. It's not getting liquid in all of your negative space. And so I will just stamp the entire block with this guy and then apply, and then move on to the next one, stamp and move on. So basically what I'll do is I'll just put the paint in, and I'll use a palette knife, and I'll just spread it evenly across the entire surface of the trim painter. Don't know what the official name for this is, but I'll just apply the paint to here in an even manner, and then just keep filling it up. You know, sometimes your block will get gummed up and you'll have to go wash it. I love these guys. I have a couple of different types. I find this one is actually for cleaning stamps from stamp pads in like scrapbooking. And it's got this nice little piece of foam behind it. And I'll use this slightly damp to actually clean my blocks, or a toothbrush or something like that. Lots of unusual tools. I like to source from unusual places, but I feel like, you know, there's a lot of cool stuff that comes out of that. And you know, there's also ye old foam stamps. You know, there's quite a bit out there for, you know, the muggles, as we say. So, you know, pick up stuff from the hobby store and play with that. And then there's also these guys, which are not wood, they are resin. And so they're kind of heavy and chunky, but, you know, commercially available. Like they took a mold of a block and decided to make it out of resin and sell it to suburbanites. I don't like the print with this one very much, though. I feel like since it's a solid resin, there's no absorption for the block, and so it does tend to, you know, kind of squish the paint into your fabric instead of applying. So it tends to get kind of runny, gummy edges. But let's see if this has anything of value in here. So we have a couple of samples. I don't know if this is be worth it, but yeah. So here's a couple of pieces on black wool where you can see that the print isn't very, you know, it's not super dense, but it really doesn't need to be. So I find that this kind of mottled look kind of reads more authentic than a big sharp chunk of paint. And so, you know, I think that is more of an aesthetic thing than a anything else. So let's go back to the chat real fast. Let's see, Renee says she's used a lot of Valspar house paint and have never found that it needs a textile medium. She stamped mostly on linen and the pieces have been washed and worn a good bit. Seem to be holding up well with undoctored house paint. So that's Veldspar apparently passes the washing test. So do you think I missed anything? Anybody got questions? I can continue to try and babble or show things. Also here, this particular cloak, we didn't have the right paint color because she wanted copper, and the copper paint I had worked fine on a small block like this lion block. It worked great for. It hated the big block. Same material, you know, they were carved out of the same material, but on the bigger block with the more flat spaces, the paint did not care for imprinting nicely, and so we ended up using the Speedball printing ink for the larger block and then an acrylic house paint for the copper. And, you know, had I been thinking about it, I might have tried to add some red to the gold, but I realized that literally as I saw her wearing it for the first time. So, you know, I found that linen loves, you know, it imprints really nicely. This is the Rust-Oleum gold on linen, and I think it really works well in that combination. Whereas, you know, on the black, there's a completely different look. If you can kind of see these two blacks, they're the same paint, same color of fabric, but obviously the texture of the wool doesn't allow for as much paint to hit the surface of the fabric. And so this will always be fuzzier than linen just by the nature of the material. And that's why silk, because it doesn't have much of a surface texture, looks so good. And so here's a, you can kind of see how that edge to edge design just kind of creates one unified piece. But yeah, so we got a new comment. All right. Oh, yes, Etienne has a great tip for house paints. When you go to the clearance shelf of Home Depot, they put abandoned or mistake mixes there for really cheap. And you can find some gorgeous colors in an expensive paint that they want to get rid of. So they price it at a price to get rid of it. Sarah, let's see what else. Here we've got a couple of pictures of the process for that gown I was speaking of. So I literally drew out every pattern piece and then just stamped in each piece and then, you know, handed them off to her. But, you know, it was just such a fun project. And it ended up that the large block we didn't use because her body was so small that anything of that, you know, size, once I started printing it out, I realized she was going to be completely swallowed by this pattern. And so we ended up changing the design from the original concept because the block itself was not appropriate for the person that we were printing it for, just scale wise. So we ended up doing, you know, just a, you know, an all over pattern, but it was, you know, really fun. Anyway, and then sometimes you want to do something that's a little more subtle. And so this would be a kind of a tone on tone. It's actually showing up quite bright in the camera, but you know, after it was washed a couple of times, it ended up being much more faint. But, you know, having a light color on a light color, you know, that print doesn't necessarily pop out, but then when you notice it, it's like, oh, you know, so, you know, keep in mind that you don't, even if you want this all over crazy print, maybe you don't want it to stand out. You want it to kind of, you know, draw the eye in, as they say. So, and then this was that crazy block that I tried to do unmounted. And I ended up tearing into the corners around the design because I thought the flexibility would give me some control, and it ended up, no, the flexibility just made it a lot more squirrely and cartoonish, trying to, you know, get all that done before 12th night. It was like Wacky Sex was playing. So I ended up mounting it on a piece of wood, and it worked better once it was rigid. But yeah, Ashton says he loves this block. This is based off of Roger II's coronation tunic, which is currently held in the Austrian treasury and is on my bucket list of places to go. So yeah, I love that. Also, I kind of wanted to point out taking designs from, maybe non-traditional sources. I absolutely love the medieval tiles, and so I have a whole series of blocks that I have based off of these cathedral tiles, and they kind of are perfect for the summit. So we've got the Grail and the Griffin and the Fleurs, and these make really great just kind of bits and pieces. What am I trying to say? Like the Legos of block printing. So I can pretty much, I was like, oh, well, I'll put an all over pattern, and here's a little Griffin, and then we'll put a Grail over here and whatnot. And so, I just absolutely love the tiles as a source. So I hope other people enjoy wearing them. Anyway, that is about coming to the end of the treasures I wanted to show you. 3D printed stamps. Moon has asked if I have experience with 3D printed stamps, and that is a no. If I could convince my husband that I needed a 3D printer, I would. But I'm running out of table space, and I just got a Cricut. But yeah, I know that several people on the Painted Textiles group have had really good luck with 3D printed textiles or block prints. So libraries do have maker spaces, and I really need to remember to go down to mine, but I am a goblin of my house. And so when I get into a making mode, I want all my tools around me. Let's see, Lady, I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Erminside, sorry, dyslexia is not my friend. Do I just press down when I stamp? She noticed a mallet in my photos. Yeah, again, it depends on the fabric, the surface, the paint, and the phase of the moon. So literally every time you go to block printing, all those things are going to change, and that's why testing on cabbage is so important. Senda, thank you very much, Senda. So yeah, it changes between each and every project, and so it is so important for that first part of your stamping session to be troubleshooting between your paint and your surface and how much pressure you need to apply. Going back to that 12-inch block that I had cut, that one, I ended up every single impression, I was counting to 50 with my mallet. I would do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and like to get a good impression, it had to be smashed. But for some things, it's really like a stamp in that pad and then onto the table and then moving on down. Those little 2x2 blocks, those don't need a hammer. Those just get a mush. So I think size of block is going to decide on how much pressure as well as material. Let's see, Renee has asked if I've tried cutting wood stamps with my Cricut yet. I have the wood, I have the blade. I haven't done it yet. But yes, I love my Cricut, and I'm still learning how to use it. I want to do appliques with it and that sort of thing too. So but yeah, it's all these fun machines that make our crafting easier are actually just new systems that we need to learn a whole new skill for. So, yeah. All right, Clovis, and do you guys?
I had a question.
Yeah.
How do you keep your patterns linear? It is beautiful.
Registration. So
okay.
I have an argument. I have a whole drawer back here full of different size tapes. I've got 1/4 inch tape, I've got 1 inch tape, I've got 2, 3, and so I will use various widths of tape to mark how far between. Some blocks are right next to each other, and so I just kind of try and keep, maybe there's a piece of tape that goes all the way across one repeat of my stamp, and I've got it marked with a Sharpie every place where I want to start a repeat. I have not used this trick yet, but I've seen it in artisan videos of traditional craftspeople in India. They have a stick, they have a little dowel that's cut to the size between each one, and they just eyeball it. And so sometimes I eyeball it, sometimes I measure obsessively, like with Eleanor's dress. But yeah, super fun to try and just make sure that everything lines up. And I actually had a problem with a block that I made where my block was slightly not quite in alignment with its other sides, and it was, each one was supposed to connect. And so it took me probably about 2 yards to figure out the reason why I was constantly having to shift it back on center is because I screwed up my block, and so that was me creating the problem. I didn't do enough measurement to make sure that those corners were actually going to align up with each other. So when I would align this corner, that one would go out, and when I align this corner, the next one would be 1/2 inch off. Ugh. It was gorgeous when it was done, but that one was a headache. I have quilting rulers also. I will lay down a 6-inch ruler to mark between each row that I want to do. And so like for the bicranial bears that I did for His Excellency Adiantum, I did a row of bears where they were maybe every 4 inches, and then I would do the next one and I would do that in the same alignment, but then the 3rd row I would come back and I'd go in the middle of those previous 2 rows and I'd offset and just eyeball, because at that point, you're not going to be that far off to the eye. Let's see, Etienne has another tip to, oh God, thank you, Etienne. This is like one of the most important things you have to do. Mark the backside of your block with which way is right side up. He also adds center lines on the back of the block. No, that one has a center line, but it doesn't have an arrow. But yeah, marking your coordinates and making sure there's a big old this side up is so important when the back side of your block is a geometric shape. So some things are easier to tell the top and bottom of, like if I was using the bicranial bear, obviously Gur and Ar have a point at the bottom, so that's going to be easy. But which way's up? That guy. Oh, and this one I wanted to talk about just briefly. This is a very complicated block, but it's so cute because this is a set of 2. So this block would get printed on the 4 sides around this guy, and then this guy goes right in the middle. And I think it's so cute, and it's based off I think of a 11th century textile. So consider how do you want to create your patterns, because you could do stamps with different colors. So like this one would get stamped in gold and this one would get stamped in black, and they would offset each other. Actually, I think it was more of a kind of a sepia tone, but there's so much fun stuff you can do, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it. You just have to have the ability to have a hoard. Heat setting and heat treating. A pain in the butt. If you can find something that doesn't need to be heat set, stick with that as much as possible. I finally, being new to the Cricut ownership, I got a really great deal on one of those giant Cricut pressing critters. And so I have not yet used that for heat treating, but that was definitely one of the things that I wanted to use it for. Was I got it so that it would make heat treating less of a pain in the butt. Because heat treating is basically setting your ink into the fabric so that it won't wash out. And some of them don't need it, some of them do. I don't think the Speedball does, but Versatex, if you don't heat treat it, it'll wash out the first time. You can also heat treat in the oven, which I've done before and always makes me a nervous wreck, so I don't like doing it. I would much rather spend an hour ironing and know that everything got up to temp. But yeah, as far as this person who recommended it said she never had to heat treat, so I haven't done it either. And yeah, read your instructions. Every paint's going to be different. You know, if you are super worried about it before you invest many hours, because, you know, a yard of fabric is at least an hour of printing, depending on how intense it is, you know. And so, Moon has said that the Craftsman, and I love that channel too, and that is not CRAFT, it's CRAFS, Craftsman on YouTube. He says he heat treats with a light pass of a heat gun or a really hot hair dryer. And I have a heat gun. I might try an example. So yeah, a heat gun would get a nice broad area all at once, you know, as opposed to, you know, your dryer won't get hot enough. And so that's why heat treating sometimes can be done in the oven. I know with silk, I've read, you know, you create these contraptions with like stovepipe and rolls. And so for like the silk dyers, they can oftentimes have like this crazy stovepipe setup to steam treat theirs. But yeah, definitely test, and test. That's my my recommendation. Is everything is kind of a discovery of how your various factors are going to interact with each other. But yeah, all right. Do I have anybody else wanting to have a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation for a good beginner project? Like, is it a good idea to just do like the bottom piece of a chunk of fabric and then, or
You've got kids, and I would say your kids' garb is probably a great testing ground for how your stuff is going to wear. And so, you know, you could stamp some of their garb and zhuzh it up at the same time as you're testing out, you know, how durable is this on my kid's linen tunic, you know. And worn linen is going to take paint differently than brand new linen. And so, you know, that's another thing that you can test with. I would say start with what you have, you know, play with what you have and then add more into it, which is how I've collected all of this stuff. Is that like I started with, you know, a couple of knives and ended up just continuously adding to my collection a little bit here, a little bit there, you know, and I now could probably, you know, outfit an army. Quite literally, especially if they like silk, because I gotta have it. Actually, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, let's see, we got somebody who came late, and then no, there is no handout. Fred had to go because it's past his bedtime. Thank you for joining us, Fred. But yeah, so I think it's really just like, it's play for me. Like it really is, it is looking at what works and what doesn't work and moving on to the next thing. And somebody says, hey, I want this, and I have the desire to help them figure that out. And like like Renee Tane just like flagged me down when I was walking by their booth one day and like, hey, can we block print with these? And I'm like, let me find out, you know. So thank you for coming. Is it Meva or Maeve? I'm not quite sure. I had a great time, guys. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for all your questions. Etienne, it's always good to see you. I miss you. And yeah. And I think there was a couple other people whose names I recognize, but if I touch something on my screen, I'm going to lose everything. So.
Well, we appreciate you teaching the class for us, because it so frequently the heavily embroidered applique pieces are lovely, but are also intensive in a variety of ways that are intimidating.
I mean, I did a little bit when I was a teenager, and I'm like, this is pretty, it's not for me. I will sit and I will hand sew a dress, but don't make me embroider it. Yeah. Where the difference is there, I don't know, but my brain was just like,
I understand. But yeah, yes, unrelated. How well does block printing cover grass stains on tunics? Just, you know.
I haven't had to, but I would say if you found a nice opaque paint, again, that Speedball is really great for coverage. But I do have a wonderful stain remover, which is equal parts baking soda, hydrogen peroxide, and Blue Dawn dish detergent. That has taken out almost every stain I have come across.
Okay, I'll have to remember that, because, you know,
I had a gifted to me, I had a beautiful white wool coat, and the owner swears she never sat in anything, but there was like a big grease spot right on the bum. And so Tag would walk around when we were sitting with the and Baron Tag would be walking around with this big stand on his butt. I'm like, I'm gonna have to do something about that. And so, you know, luckily the wool did not disintegrate, but the stain did.
Oh, good.
Raven, the stain remover is baking soda, Blue Dawn dish detergent, and hydrogen peroxide, all in equal parts. Slather it on. All right. Well, those questions weren't for me anyway. Ha ha ha. All right. That was fun. Thank you so much for doing these classes, and thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully, I have imparted knowledge of some kind into other people's brains. So.
Definitely, along with a certain amount of inspiration. I mean, I just have to, you know,
paint
pay
the
attention
world. Actually, one of the people from our medieval textile groups has gone and started a mundane painting group called Paint All the Things. And I was like, I love it.
That sounds similar to our general take on life, which is, you know, make all the things and then paint all the things and carve all the things and spin all the things. So. Yeah. But yes, thank you so much. It's been a marvelous class.
Yes, and if anybody wants to ask me questions outside of this, I have an Instagram, The Modern Medieval Maker, all one word, and I will often put things that I am working on that aren't super secret hush hush. And right now it's a lot of Halloween stuff and mess making, because, you know, 'tis the season to be spooky. So